Again, dear audience, welcome. I'm Maria Piggin. I work for the ERN-EuroBloodnet, so the European Reference Network on Rare Hematological Disease. And I'm very pleased to welcome all of you on this 8th session of the topic on focus on aplastic anemia and PNH for family and for patients and their family. And this program has been coordinated indeed in collaboration with the Patients Association, so the PNH Support, focused on PNH are represented by Maria Piggin, ePAG of the ERN-EuroBloodnet, and Lichterzellen focused on aplastic anemia and PNH, represented by Pascale Olivia Burmester and EURORDIS. So this program is targeting patients and their family, and it has the aim indeed to talk to the patient community in order to give visibility to medical services available in Europe, the recent quality of life advances in this field of rare condition and treatment option. Today, we are going to talk about what effect does aplastic anemia and PNH on my life. So as said, we have a duo. So the first one is Professor James Panse, Deputy Director of the Department of Oncology, Hematology, Hemostasiology, and Stem Cell Transplantation at University Hospital Aachen in Germany. And Maria Piggin already presented, so a PNH patient who founded the PNH Support in 2015, and she's also, I said, an ePAG of the ERN, and she is also an European Patient Academy Therapeutic Innovation Fellow. So I'm very pleased to pass the floor to these two expert speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria. So hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. Some of you have been to these webinars before. This one will cover sort of broad topics really, because although we have an expert with us today, Dr. Panse, he acknowledges that patients are really more expert in the topic that is going to be covered today, which is really what living with aplastic anemia or PNH or both is like. So Dr. Panse is going to cover some information about quality of life and how we collect that information from patients about what it's like living with the conditions, what we do with that information, why it's important to collect it, together with covering other topics, really any questions that you might have about living with aplastic anemia or PNH that you would like to discuss, and I look forward to us having an interesting discussion about these. Dr. Panse, if you move your slides forward, we can I can come back to some example questions that you might want to pose later. So just in front of you is a list. We're not going to go through them one by one, of the kind of things that we thought patients might be interested in hearing about, and the kinds of questions that patients ask patient organizations and patient advocates quite often about living with these conditions. Questions around exercise, holidays, where to go, whether they can go away, how you travel with the condition, diet and nutrition and how that impacts the condition, and also being able to work and study, and also starting a family. So these are the kinds of things that we hope that you'll be interested in posing questions about, or you may have others that you would like to know about, but we're hopeful that you will join us in a discussion about these topics.
Okay, should I go ahead then?
Please do.
Thanks, Maria. So warm welcome from my side again, and Maria has already pointed out that the experts are, certainly not myself. I'm a physician treating patients with PNH and aplastic anemia, and I know patients who can tell me about what it is living with the disease, but I'm far from being an expert about, these things. Nonetheless, I have a special interest in quality of life in these diseases and other diseases too. And whenever we talk about quality of life, I think it is very important to define really what quality of life is, or to at least talk about, we have to wait for a second because the cleaning lady just came in, sorry. So we have to define what quality of life is, or at least talk about the things people think quality of life is, in order, to talk about the same. And the WHO, can't move this forward, define quality of life. But before we go into the quality of life aspect, the reason why we nowadays talk about quality of life in patients with PNH and aplastic anemia is that these are not necessarily lethal diseases anymore. Before we had specific treatments, people were dying from the disease. And on this slide, I'm going to walk you through it. Here on the left side, you can see the actual survival from the time of diagnosis in patients with PNH. And if you follow my arrow, I hope you can see it. You can see that the survival was rather dismal, and the median survival time before had any complement inhibitors available was 10 years. And if you compared that to an age and sex match control, there was a huge difference. Now, if you look at patients with a complement inhibitor, and these are data who are also not the newest ones from Richard Kelly from 2011, when eculizumab was available, you can see, for example, that patients under the age of 50 don't die from the disease or complications from the disease at all anymore. So patients, after the availability of complement inhibitors, all of a sudden had reasons to think about the quality of their life living with the disease, instead of thinking about what might happen to them, if they're going to die anyway at all. The same holds true for the aplastic anemia patients, and these slides here are a bit more complicated. What you see here is the survival probability of patients who are treated for aplastic anemia with immunosuppressive therapy. And there are three groups. There's one group from the 90s, there's one group from the 90s into the 2000s, and there's one group from the early 2000s. And what you can see, if you respond to immunosuppressive treatment, the survival is basically the same. A few patients die from the disease, but all in all, the survival is okay. Now, what about the non-responding patients? Those are the ones who don't respond to the immunosuppressive therapy. And you can see there is a huge difference whether or not you've been treated between 1989 and 1996 or after 2002. And the reason for that is that the supportive measurements became so much better. We had better antibiotics, we had better antifungals, we had different kinds of treatments, we had all kinds of supportive measures. So even if you're not responding to the intended treatment, in this case, and the data might even look better now if you look between 2010 and 2020, for example, we don't have them, the survival curve might be up here. And so this is a group of patients who still suffers from, for example, thrombocytopenia or low blood counts in other ranges, anemia, leukopenia, but they are living with these low blood counts, so not responding to. And here we start talking about the quality of life they're living. And if you ask the WHO what quality of life is, they define quality of life as an individual's perception. So it's a perception of the individual who's living, of their position in life, and this is important, in the context of the culture and value system. And excuse me for just using this as an example, you can see that those those people live in the same country, within the same culture, in the context of the same culture, but might have a completely different value system if you look at those who vote for Trump versus those who won't. And so you can see that if you add those value system and the context of the culture and put that in relation to their goals, to their expectations, to their standards, and to their concern, quality of life is a broad-ranging concept and is affected in a complex way. And this is important for patients, in addition to all these issues, by the person's physical health, all together combined with psychological state, personal beliefs, social relationships, and relationship to salient features in their environment. So this is quality of life. Now, so how do we define health? Health doesn't necessarily mean you are disease-free. The WHO criteria organization again defines health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. So it's not, you know, that you can't be diseased, not merely in the absence of the disease. And this necessarily means that if you measure the quality of health, you also have to, when you measure quality of health, indicate changes. For example, once you have the diagnosis of PNH, or once the diagnosis is made, or aplastic anemia, your quality of life can be very severely affected and you might be very down. You get your treatment, you get your hopes up, and your quality of life can improve. The treatment doesn't work and the quality of life decreases again, although you're at the same time point. So you have to measure quality of life always in the context what happens to you. And this is why people came up with that term health-related quality of life, although these are most of the time interchangeably used. So it says here, although there are generally satisfactory ways of measuring the frequency, severity of diseases, this is not the case insofar as the measurements of well-being and the quality of life concerned. Meaning that you need specific tools in order to measure the quality of life of patients with a certain disease. And those tools have to be disease-specific, because a quality of life measurement tool for a patient with breast cancer might completely or will completely differ from a quality of life measurement tool for a patient with lung cancer, which differs completely from the patients with PNH. This is why we have to develop tools that measures your quality of life in regards and in relation to your context, and your context is your specific disease. Now, if we look at, you know, what quality of life measurements we have available, those are called questionnaires, and those questionnaires, they are manifold in all kinds of diseases, and they measure all kinds of different topics or items. You can measure social well-being, you can measure physical well-being, you can measure the resources, the use of healthcare resources, you can measure self-esteem, you can measure socioeconomic impact, you can measure financial impact. All these issues relate to your quality of life. Unfortunately, for the so-called non-malignant or benign disease, who are anything else but benign, and that's why we call them classic hematology diseases nowadays, there is no specific quality of life tool to use to measure the quality of life, except for the patients with sickle cell anemia and immune thrombocytopenia. So me as a physician, if I am talking to patients, and you might have had that experience before, we talk about the things which are easy to measure for me. For example, your hemoglobin level, your LDH, your degree of hemolysis, your thrombocytopenia, whatever. But for you as a patient, you have questions about all kinds of other things. What about my fatigue? What about my daily activities? Can I, go on doing my hobbies? What about vacation? All these kinds of stuff. So while I'm very, very comfy talking about these things, I might not be as comfy talking about those things, because the answers are a lot harder, to give in relation to these issues. Now, when we talk about quality of life, and by the way, you can interrupt anytime at all, send in questions, or, put your hands up if anything needs to be explained a bit more. There's other players who also are involved in quality of life measurements. For example, your health insurance wants to know how your quality of life is in regards to fitness or your usage of the healthcare system. The pharmaceutical company is especially interested in quality of life, especially if you have a disease where there's more than one treatment option. Because if the effect that the treatment is doing on your hemoglobin level, for example, one might be better than the other only if it affects quality of life. So if a pharmaceutical drug company comes in with a new drug, nowadays the healthcare authorities, and these are the next ones, the healthcare authorities, want to know, is one drug, if it is the same in regards to treatment effect, better than the other? because it affects the quality of life of the patients. And this is why whenever new drugs are developed, it is necessary to include quality of life questionnaire into those developments. Unfortunately, like I said, there is no disease-specific quality of life questionnaire for patients with aplastic anemia or PNH that is so-called validated. Validated means that it has been proven to really measure the effect drugs have or treatments have on your quality of life. And if you look at the treatment studies that have been done for PNH patients, for example, the quality of life questionnaires that have been used were quality of life questionnaires that weren't developed for the measurement of quality of life of aplastic anemia or PNH patients, but for the quality of life measurements in cancer. Quality of life questionnaire C30 is the most used quality of life tool in the world, and this has been used to assess quality of life when eculizumab was introduced. Same tool was used when eculizumab was used or studied in 2006. In 2019, when ravulizumab came available, in addition to the quality of life questionnaire about cancer, they at least added a fatigue scale questionnaire. But for example, in the other ravulizumab trial, they just used the cancer questionnaire again. And it is even worse in aplastic anemia patients. In aplastic anemia patients, in those 4 studies, these two are about stem cell transplantation. This is L-Trombopag for aplastic anemia patients. This is romiplastin for aplastic anemia patients. No quality of life assessments were even reported. The only one who actually tried to cover quality of life was this study using L-Trombopag added to standard immunosuppression for aplastic anemia. So, although you as patients take part in clinical trials, unfortunately, where everything else is meticulously measured, in a scientific way, quality of life, in my opinion at least, is not measured adequately. And this is why we developed together with Pascale Burmester and Ulrike Göbel from the German patient advocacy groups, a quality of life questionnaire specifically for patients with aplastic anemia and PNH. And my apologies for presenting this in German. I just put it up because the original is in German. This one has been translated in between, and it's called the QLQ AA PNH 54 into different languages from Afrikaans through Serbian, Russian, Romanian, Malayan, Lithuanian, Japanese, Croatian, Korean, all kinds of different languages. And although those are 54 questions, the median time it took to complete an earlier version that included 69 items, it only takes 10 minutes of your time to complete it. And the feedback from the patients, and I think Pascale can support me if I'm saying this, is it doesn't matter how long it takes you to fill out such a questionnaire as long as it asks the right questions. So you don't want to answer questions about diarrhea or vomiting and nausea, which is the typical side effect of cancer treatment. If you're an aplastic anemia patient or a PNH patient, you rather want to answer questions about fatigue or worry about white cell drops or whatever. And so there is a questionnaire out there, and if it hasn't been used with you or you haven't been using it, please go ahead and ask your doctor. It is available and everyone can use it. So should we stop here, Maria or Pascale, and ask if there are any questions in relation to quality of life?
Yes, I think so.
Good
Does anyone have any questions on anything that Dr. Panse has said so far, or any questions about quality of life? Hi, Andy, you've got your hand up.
Hi. Something which I spoke about with my appointment, my online appointment, was the previous 3 or 4 had only been a tick box thing. And I thought, I'm fed up with this. So mercifully, it was somebody I'd spoken to before. And I said, look, I know you've got to tick your boxes and have I had this, that, and the other, but actually I do need somebody who realizes that I'm on a journey and I have particular things which I have to tackle and face. And it would be really nice if you were literate and articulate in those things, other than, more than just saying, are you hemolyzing? Are you, all those sorts of things. So this is an important thing for the professionals, I think.
Yeah, thanks. And I think what it enables you and the physician who's treating you is, once you completed a questionnaire and they look at the questionnaire and they see that you're worried about, for example, financial issues, or like you said, you're on a journey, things have been better before, but now are, getting worse. You can talk about these things. And this is, I guess, what physicians and patients should do more, and what we initially, at least as physicians, started out to be doing, talking with the patients, which nowadays became a rare thing we're able to do. So I absolutely appreciate your comment. Yeah.
And I think it's also to be talking together here to say, actually, it's okay to challenge your doctor when they're only asking about swallowing difficulties, etc. To say, hold on a minute. And I think to be helpful in terms of equipping to do that, it's quite a frightening thing. And I used to be a GP. It was still quite countercultural for me to say to my doctor, look, you're not doing properly here. And to have a resource that says, look, would you mind for our next consultation looking at this as part of your homework? So it's not just Davidson's Principles and Practice of Medicine. It's actually, this is, can you look at this for next time? But that's, I think it needs, for an ordinary patient, quite a big gulp to say, I need something that you're not giving me, which doesn't seem to be in keeping with what you're prepared to give me. Please, can you do it? So I think it's some sort of equipping or even training. How, as a patient, can we be empowered to deal properly with our needs with medical professionals who aren't switched on in that way?
Absolutely. I do agree, absolutely. Especially since you said an ordinary patient. I mean, yeah, there is no such thing as an ordinary patient. I mean, there's patients and there's physicians.
I used to be a GP, so
yeah, you said that. Yeah.
And somebody who's not had that will just tend to just say, "Oh dear, well, I suppose that's what I've got to put up with." But
yeah, agree.
Maybe it's important to also say that a lot of the doctors you speak to, they don't mean bad by not addressing this. They just are not aware what they could even help you with this. But I think it helps the patient already to just speak about this with the doctor. So if you want to do this and your doctor doesn't do it, is not open for it, you can always use this questionnaire to, tick your own box in the appointment that you have. Take the quality of life measurement with you and tell your doctor that this is all the things he should be aware of you're suffering from, even though he might not be able to address them at the moment. And I think that is kind of interesting. It's also important for him to know, because a lot of patients don't speak about what they really suffer from, what the symptoms are, because they get the feeling the doctors are not really interested and they can't do anything anyway. So I think it's worth trying to speak to the physicians with it, about it, and just use this as a tool, as a helping tool for you to address it, and also to find the right wording for what you're suffering from, and maybe even understand that some of the symptoms you experience have to do with the disease. And also, if you use this questionnaire for yourself, you may even be able to realize that you have been getting better or worse at times. If you know, you could even do it for yourself and see, oh, there's a change of therapy coming up. I will check my own, you know, I will do it myself, and then you have something to compare it to, and just use it for yourself, and you can show it to the physician then also.
Yeah, and in addition, you said it quite nicely, it's a journey, and there are so many things that have an impact on your quality of life. It's not necessarily always the disease or the disease-related issues. It might be all kinds of different things that, you know, impact your quality of life. And if you've been a GP and have been taking care of patients over long, you know, time frames, you know, knowing their families, and so you know that quality of life waxes and wanes and goes up and down, you know, due to several issues. And so, yeah, I absolutely agree. There's one question. Should I answer that in the chat, Pascale?
Go on, yeah.
Do patients with aplastic anemia / PNH have worse quality of life than patients with PNH without aplastic anemia? So what I can say, I'm not an expert, I'm saying because I'm not a patient, is this is not the right question to answer. The quality of life depends, like I said before, on a lot of facts on the patient itself. So you should not ask, does this patient have a worse or better quality of life than the other one? You should ask, does a patient during treatment get a better quality of life or worse quality of life? So you can't compare either one with the other. So you should always compare just one patient on their journey, like you just pointed out, Andy. This would be my answer. Okay.
Shall we move on?
Shall we move on? Okay. Okay, so quality of life. And quality of life, like we said, and Pascale said it, there's lots of topics covered within the questionnaire, and you can talk with your physician, your doctor, about all kinds of things. Okay, so let me see. So questions Maria and Pascale came up with were things like exercise. For example, is a patient allowed to exercise when someone is anemic? How do you exercise with fatigue, which sometimes goes hand in hand to being fatigued and anemic, although you can be fatigued if you're not that anemic. And what you should always remember is that the disease affects your physical health, and you can't overcome that just by, you know, training even tougher or more than you used to do. And what I find very useful is if you think about a traffic light, if you stress yourself either by walking, jogging, or whatever you do, you should never stress yourself upon the level beyond yellow. You should rather be between green and yellow than between yellow and red, and you should never, you know, be on the red side. You should not be sweaty, you know, after an exercise or something, because it is known that, for example, fatigue does not go away if you go to the gym, you know, and pump yourself up, because then you're even more fatigued. It rather helps to do things like walking or slow yoga or other things. Having said this, this might not be the case for a certain patient who used to go to the gym for 20 years, you know, and this was his only, you know, salvation to be in the gym. For those patients, the gym might be the right thing to do. So I'd recommend the traffic light. If you do some exercise or whatever you do, if you walk through a nice environment or whatever you do to be physical well, or if you ride your bike, or if you go swimming, or, you know, whatever you do, it is very important that this also affects your quality of life, because it releases endorphins, and these endorphins, for example, make you feel better. We all know these things, that if we accomplish something, we feel better. You know, although we might be at the same physical situation, we might feel better because we accomplished something. And so this is just one of those points I can say. Unfortunately, all the studies so far that have been done in regards to, or in relations to, fatigue or exercise during treatment and all kinds of stuff have all been done with cancer patients. because there's a lot more cancer patients than there are aplastic anemia and PNH patients. The only exception is stem cell transplantations. There have been studies for stem cell transplanted patients, and there, while we used to think that during stem cell transplantation you should avoid any kind of exercise or any kind of strain or whatever, we nowadays know that even during a stem cell transplantation from an unrelated donor, you can have physical activity, and you should have physical activity, because we now know that we have this concept of better in, better out. So, if you have a transplantation scheduled, have a trainer with you or a coach with you to give you some physical exercise, because the better you go in, the better you go out, and do this while you're on stem cell transplantation. Should I go on? Holidays. How can I plan my holidays best? Should I travel with medication? Fortunately, these questions, or unfortunately, these questions are very relevant when it comes to eculizumab, because eculizumab had to be given every 2 weeks, and this was very, very hard for patients to go on a vacation for more than 2 weeks, because you have to make appointments at some other places. There are countries where there's only eculizumab available, so for these patients, it's still the same. You shouldn't miss your eculizumab dose because you're traveling abroad, so you should not stretch it to 3 or 4 weeks. Nowadays, with other drugs like ravulizumab, and for aplastic anemia patients, of course, if they take in cyclosporin or a trombopag or whatever they taken, these medications should be carried with you all the time. And you should know whether or not you should cool the medication or you should not keep the medication refrigerated. This is a very important point. So before you go on a holiday or on a vacation, just make sure that wherever you go, you're allowed to bring your medication with you. You have to talk to your doctor if you go on a flight to give you a certain document so that you're allowed to take, for example, the medications on board. But I guess you all know this way better than I do. Any countries out there which should be avoided in the quality of blood in countries where we might need a transfusion? Except for Russia and the Ukraine at the moment, I'm not aware of any countries where I would say there is a shortage of blood, or the quality of blood, if they have a Red Cross transfusion system, is worse than here back home. But having said that, I have no idea how the quality of a transfusion would be, for example, in Slovakia or Yemen or Kazakhstan, or wherever you want to go to. So these are questions that have to be answered individually, I'd say. Anything else you want to add, Pascale or Maria?
Well, I think it's a personal decision, like you said. It's a matter of feeling secure, and I probably wouldn't risk too much if I had a disease or have a disease like that. I kept my traveling actually to the Western countries because of that, but some patients do travel further abroad, and if they're, as long as they're happy with it, why not?
I had a patient just the other day for a second opinion who said he loves to travel to the Amazonas, Brazil. There's good doctors, taking care of patients with aplastic anemia and PNH in Brazil, especially in Sao Paulo. But if you're within the Orinoco or wherever, might be hard to keep your stuff dry. So yeah, absolutely. The next question about diet is a question that, of course, me being a hematologist and oncologist, is asked by every single patient I see, no matter if he suffers from cancer, aplastic anemia, he's transplanted or not. So far, we don't know if any diet can improve your quality of life. I'd say everything you like to eat is definitely better than anything you don't like to eat. So this definitely improves your quality of life. If you're happy, having fish and chips every second day, this might improve your quality of life. Just go ahead and do it, because there are no foods or diet that can put you at risk because of your PNH or aplastic anemia, except for raw foods, raw fish, you know, the same stuff that makes you sick, you know, if you're without PNH and aplastic anemia, makes you sick if you're with PNH and aplastic anemia. And especially the neutropenic diet that has been, you know, recommended by a lot of physicians over the years and years and years for aplastic anemia patients or for patients under stem cell transplantation is, thank God, now gone. So even if you're on a stem cell transplantation ward, there's no need to, you know, be on a special diet. You can eat basically all the stuff that can be peeled or cooked. You don't need a specific diet that doesn't taste, you know, like meals anymore, because it doesn't reduce the risk of infection. This has been shown again in oncology patients, not in a aplastic anemia patient, but you can just, you know, translate the data. So there's no need. If you are an aplastic anemia patient with your leukocyte count below 0.2 granulocytes, 0.2 per NL or 0.5 per NL, you might be, you know, a little bit more worrisome and take care a bit more. So you have to cook your food and you have to peel it and all that stuff. But other than that, you can basically eat whatever you want.
But like no salad, right?
That's what I said, raw food.
Mm-hmm.
You can eat salad if you use that salad packed in those plastic bags, because it's not salad anymore, but you know, but you shouldn't eat salad fresh from the field where the cow has just been, you know, walking through. Yeah. If you can eat a carrot salad, you know, just peel the carrots and then
peel the carrot, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
What about nuts? Sorry, just the nut thing.
So the nut thing. So we were worried about nuts because if you take nuts which are within a canister, they might, you know, have or bring the risk of fungal infections. So again, if you want to eat a nut, eat your nut. If you want to eat a kilogram of nuts, you know, which look a little bit fuzzy, don't eat them. You wouldn't eat them otherwise. So this is my personal opinion. Again, everything I said should not be used against me. Since this is recorded and people might look at it later on, you know, don't tell your physician that I said you're, you know, able to eat nuts. But yeah, those data about the neutropenic diet, they just been released within the last couple of years. And so nurses, physicians, you know, need to become accustomed to those data. And you know, strict transplantation units might still adhere to a very, very strict neutropenic diet. But at last ASH, there has been a beautiful study from Italian guys who gave the neutropenic diet versus the non-neutropenic diet, and the rates of infections were exactly the same. Of course, people were not allowed to, you know, eat fresh salad and tons of nuts. And so, yeah, you can eat a Snickers if you want to eat peanuts. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So next one. Oh, this is about the fatigue. Pascale especially asked me to put in a slide that talks about fatigue and hemoglobin levels. And the reason for this is, in the early days when the PNH registry was opened, people were asked about the level of fatigue. And there were people who were fatigued with low hemoglobin levels, and there were people who were fatigued with higher hemoglobin levels. And this led to the notion and the idea that fatigue itself is not related to hemoglobin level, because just a lot of PNH patients, for example, report fatigue is the most mentioned symptom. But this is, you know, an interpretation of the data in the wrong way. Of course, there are patients who have a normal hemoglobin level who are still fatigued, because that normal hemoglobin level is due to the fact that your bone marrow is constantly producing new red cells, which is reflected by the fact that your reticulocytes counts are very high. So there is still a level of destruction of red cells, and your bone marrow is producing and producing and producing and producing. And normally, a normal bone marrow produces 1 million red cells per second. So if you have a reticulocytosis of 300 or 500, it produces 5 or 10 per second. And so your bone marrow gets exhausted and you get fatigued. And so fatigue and hemoglobin level, they are associated. And this might look like a complicated slide, but is not. This is from the pegcetacoplan study. This is a C3 inhibitor product. And you can see here on this axis the hemoglobin level, and the green shady level is the normal hemoglobin level. And you can here see the fatigue score, and between 40 and 50 is what we call the fatigue score of the general population. And what you can see is that whenever your hemoglobin level rises from around 9 to 10 up to 12 or 15, there's more points within the green shady area, with a better hemoglobin level than with a lower hemoglobin level. Although there are also patients with a hemoglobin level of 10 who don't feel fatigued, in a way that this patient, for example, with a hemoglobin level of 10.5 has a fatigue score of 20, while this one with a hemoglobin level of 8.5 has a fatigue score of 40, so an almost normal one. But all in all, these are the ones, and those are all the green ones, the ones who received pegcetacoplan with the proximal complement inhibition, who have at the same time high hemoglobin levels and a high fatigue score. So fatigue in some way is associated with hemoglobin levels. In my opinion, you should also see here the reticulocyte counts, because those are the patients in which the reticulocyte counts came down. So the bone marrow didn't have to work that hard anymore. This is nothing that has been scientifically proven, but all the new proximal complement inhibitors, which are firstly used in patients who don't respond or didn't respond that well to the terminal complement inhibitors, all those patients showed a decrease in their reticulocyte counts, paralleled by an increase in their fatigue levels, or an increase in their not fatigue levels. So yeah, I think there is an association between hemoglobin levels and fatigue. So the chances are higher not being fatigued if your hemoglobin is low compared to one with a high hemoglobin level. Does that make sense? Okay. So can I start working with either disease? That totally depends on you. If you have aplastic anemia and you have a neutrophil count below 0.5 per microliters, I wouldn't, work in an environment, where lots of people go in and out, or I wouldn't work as a bus driver, whatever. If your leukocytes are low and your hemoglobin level is okay, there's nothing, against working at home on your computer, doing whatever you want to do. If you have PNH, at least in Germany, it used to be very tough to work under eculizumab, because in Germany, eculizumab is given only, within a hospital or a hematologist practice, while, for example, in the UK, it has been given by the nurses outside. So yeah, you can work with either disease. All depends on your risk, your work environments, and this should always, I think, discussed with your physician, just to make sure, are you still on immunosuppressive therapy? Is your work something, that encounters a lot of, I don't know, you shouldn't work, I think, in a kindergarten if you are on cyclosporin and shortly beyond ATG, but you can easily work as representative for ERN, like Maria Angela, behind the scenes. Yeah. Does that answer the question? Stephen is showing, yeah. Okay. Do I have to follow a diet? So starting a family. Living with the disease and having an okay quality of life might let you think about starting a family, because the treatment seems to be working, and and while at the beginning you might have been worried about dying, all of a sudden you realize you can start living because your life expectancy is not different from normal population. And so this relates mostly to the PNH patients. For the aplastic anemia patients with immunosuppressive therapy, once the immunosuppressive therapy is gone, there is no reason to worry about, pregnancy. Although there are some reports that during pregnancy or while getting pregnant, the aplastic anemia came back because it's such an immunosuppressive need if you have a foreign body within yourself. So talk with your physician about it. If you got stem cell transplantation for the treatment of aplastic anemia, the chances that you still might get pregnant after stem cell transplantations are quite high, because the stem cell transplantation condition and regimen used for aplastic anemia patients is not as toxic to your reproductive cells as the conditioning regimen for malignant diseases. But if you are a young patient going into stem cell transplantation, you should take every precaution and measurements before you go into the transplantation if you're willing to stay, or become pregnant afterwards. For PNH patients, so far, I think what I can say is that although complement inhibition does not have a label for pregnancy, there have been enough reports so far that if a PNH patient becomes pregnant, they should be treated with eculizumab because the data are out there. With the introduction of ravulizumab, at least in Germany, I'm only aware of one patient who became pregnant under ravulizumab, and so far, from what I know, that pregnancy doesn't differ from the pregnancies under eculizumab. There's absolutely no experience with the proximal inhibitors, pegcetacoplan, iptacopan, danicopan, vermicopan, whatever, about pregnancies so far. And this and all the other questions, I think, raises the issue of registries. And I think each and every patient with such a rare disease should be in or within a registry in order to learn more about the disease. So we are going to be able to answer all these questions that come up in the future. And so, yeah, this is what I can say in regards to planning a family. Or anything you want to add, Pascale or Maria? No? No? Okay. So I guess then, to sum up what I said is that quality of life can, and I think should, or should I say must, be measured in patients with aplastic anemia and PNH, and it should be adequately addressed. Challenge your physicians. Go ahead. Physicians like to be challenged, no matter what they seem to say, but go ahead and do that. No need for neutropenic diets, with the exceptions. Sports activities, vacations needs individual planning and individual assessment. Should always be talked about with your physician. This, by the way, might be another good introduction to talk about quality of life aspects. And there's going to be more answers and most likely questions through the inclusion of patients into registries. And with this, I'll give back and hand over the microphone to Maria and Pascale, I guess.
Thank you, Dr. Panse. So we have a lot of time left for a good discussion or more questions and answers to be discussed about any of these topics or others that have not been mentioned. Perhaps I'll start off with a question about the PNH and AA quality of life tool or absence of one. Why do you think we haven't got one yet? Why do you think, I mean, I know not every disease has one, but why do you think when there's so much research activity in PNH that we don't have a quality of life tool that's validated yet?
Well, the thing is, in order to validate a questionnaire, you need to have a patient group within a study in which one part of the patient group gets a treatment while the other one doesn't. So this is normally when you develop a patient quality of life questionnaire, for example, for breast cancer patients, you put them in a trial, and there's zillions of breast cancer patients. 100 of those breast cancer patients, for example, get treatment A, 100 of those breast cancer patients get treatment B or no treatment at all. And then you see if the, quality of life that changes or, should change, during treatment is captured by the tool, and then you can validate the tool. With PNH, we had the Triumph study in 2004, I think, if I remember correctly, and the other study for eculizumab in 2006, that was when they were published. Those were the only studies for 15 years in which new treatments were evaluated. So when the new compounds came out, ravulizumab, crovalimab, pegcetacoplan, etc., PP, the agencies wanted the companies to use so-called validated questionnaires. So because FDA and EMA need validated questionnaires in order to have a real assessment. So the companies were reluctant to use a non-validated questionnaires, which could not be validated because there were no studies, in combination with the validated ones. And so this is the reason why, unfortunately, I think the pharmaceutical companies lost a lot of time and did a study in which quality of life was assessed, but not with the right tools. This is changing, however. So a lot of the pharmaceutical companies realized that they need a quality of life tool in order to basically assess the quality of life of the patients they're treating with an adequate tool. And so more and more companies pick up this quality of life tool and try to incorporate it. And the ePAG registry, which is going to be launched soon, I hope, is also trying to validate this questionnaire. But for you as a patient, it doesn't matter or not if the questionnaire is validated or not. If you think this questionnaire asks the right question, just use it in order, like Pascale suggested, or Andy suggested, to look at it, see, if anything, affects you, and then use it as an introductory tool to start talking to your physician. Does that answer the question, or?
Yes. So I think it's even more important that we have something that's not about cancer. So as you said, the EORTC 330 is what we've all been answering about diarrhea and vomiting for so many years, and being like, why are you asking me these questions? They're not relevant to me. But now that we have other therapies coming onto the market, really important questions are not being asked in those quality of life questionnaires. And those are the data that they could be collecting is not only relevant to patients, but also relevant to the drug companies, because it's things like, are you able to go back to work since taking this treatment? Things like that, which have a huge impact on whether, for example, in countries that have health technology assessment, that information can go into the analysis of actually this person is now able to, contribute to as a taxpayer, for example, and they're not using as many healthcare systems, and they're not as much of a burden, etc., on the state. So those kind of questions are not really included in what's collected in trials at the moment, and it falls to organizations like, for example, the one I run in the UK, to find that information out from patients and give it to agencies, because it's not in the information that pharma collect. And I think it's really, really important. And it's, patients' lives are very different now than they were 10 years ago in terms of the treatments that are available to them and the quality of life that they now have with the various treatments that are being developed. So I think it's so important for us, and also for patients to understand how people experience different treatments, because although there's there are all the sort of the medical and the biological outcome measures that are collected in trials, the other things that aren't collected, things that are in the quality of life QLQ AA PNH 54, things that you don't get asked about by the doctor. They're so important, and those things might actually change depending on which treatment you're on. And I think that's really important data for patients, even if no one else cares about it. So we should be it should be something that's a real priority. And as you said, there's a registry that's being created under the ePAG, which stands for the International Patient Interest Group, which is managed by academics. And basically there was one registry that used to be run by, is run by Alexion, because they had the original drug, but now there are many other companies making drugs. We want to basically bring all the data under one roof, and that's going to be managed by ePAG and the academic committee. And it's through that registry that we're hoping to finally validate the quality of life tool that we've been talking about, that's specifically for PNH and aplastic anemia. But Dr. Panse, just for what you said, you have to compare it to someone who's being treated and not treated. How are we going to validate? Do you understand how we're going to validate that in the registry, if that in that way, if that's required?
So you don't necessarily have to. It doesn't have to necessarily be that you compare one is treated versus one that's not treated, but you have to have during your patient journey some changes. So the quality of life should, if your hemoglobin level, if your leukocyte counts, if your LDH, just speaking about PNH now, it stays all the same. The quality of life should be captured in a similar fashion. But once you are put on eculizumab, or you switch from eculizumab to ravulizumab, or you switch from ravulizumab to crovalimab, or to any other drug, and this, leads to a difference in some parameters, or, just different forms of application, or different time points of application, this should impact your quality of life, and this should be picked up by the quality of life questionnaire. And so within the registry, as patients are put into the registry at a certain time point, if they're willing to be put in there, they're going to have the questionnaire, and then a couple of weeks later they will have another questionnaire, and then a couple of months later they have another questionnaire, and this will be compared to all the other things the patients experience, and there should be a difference, that the quality of life questionnaire picks up. And this is what is called validation. It has been validated already in regards to, do patients understand the questions? Do patients feel those questions are relevant to me? Am I satisfied with the number of questions? Does it take too long for me, or is it right, to answer the question? This has already been validated in 100 patients with PNH and aplastic anemia, which is nothing compared to 20,000 breast cancer patients for validating a questionnaire. But 100 PNH aplastic anemia patients is a lot. And the interesting thing is that now that the questionnaire has been translated, and this is the feedback you guys give me, if you ask a patient with PNH in Japan versus a patient with PNH in Italy versus a aplastic anemia patient in Spain, they all feel that they can relate to the questions asked. And, this is a tool that is not necessarily going to be the final questionnaire for ever and ever. We might have a AA/PNH quality of life questionnaire 59 or 36 at one point in time. And just to add one point, we used to have just one treatment for PNH, and so there was no necessity to compare treatments because we only had one. Now that there are all these treatments out there, I think it is of utmost importance to see which treatment, if you have the choice, is the best for each patient, because we're now talking about individualized PNH treatment, at least, in rich countries like Germany and the UK and France, where you have all kinds of complement inhibitors available. I think, let's say in the Sahara or the Sudan, a PNH patient would be happy just to receive eculizumab, and quality of life aspects are completely different. So yeah, I completely agree. But like I said, even though there's no new drugs license, pharmaceutical companies are urged and forced by the regulators to do post-approval studies. And this is why a lot of those companies now come up incorporating the questionnaire into their post-approval studies. And they also try to use the questionnaire with online studies done here and there. There's also short ones, so-called pros. Yeah, we can talk forever and ever about the questionnaire if you want.
No, thank you very much. And also, as you said, just because it's not validated so that it's the data is collected in a standardized fashion by trials and things at the moment, it doesn't mean that patients can't use it for their own benefit and to be able to use it as a tool to discuss the things on it with their physician. Absolutely, absolutely. I guess then they can just go ahead and contact you and you can distribute it.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that unfortunately, besides this questionnaire in the future, we also have to answer the other ones too, because we have to compare it. So you will have to answer, unfortunately, the EORTC-C30 and probably the facet fatigue, which will probably anyway be combined with the QOQ AA PNH 54. So there will always be a combination depending on what we want to really find out in the study. Like also we have another one about economics that might be interesting in some context. So they will always be combined with other ones.
And if I might add one thing, you were talking about the questionnaires and the pharmaceutical industry and patient empowerment. It is now mandatory, if you want to come up with a study protocol, to not only ask the scientific community what the protocol should look like, but also to have at least one patient representative who's going to plan the study protocol together with the company. And so you as the patient can just say, okay, if we're going to do this study, this questionnaire or that questionnaire has to be included. And so I think this is a wonderful thing and an opportunity, because we I remember times when there was no treatment available for PNH patient except for stem cell transplantation. Same thing with aplastic anemia patients. Now we not only have ATG, cyclosporin, MMF, we have L-Trombopac, we have Romiplastin. There might be new treatments out there, and so once we have a choice for treatments, it is, I think, absolutely necessary to see if this treatment is the right treatment for this and that patient. And this can also only be assessed not only by parameters like hemoglobin, but also by quality of life measurements. And of course, I think the most important thing is still an exchange between the patient and the physician on eye level. Okay.
Any other questions? Any comments, Stephen?
Sorry, it's just a bit of a strange question, really, but it goes back to diet. And I've been a PNH patient since I was on the original Shepherd trial. But over the years, I've acquired some advice, shall we say. I vaguely remember it being given, but I've stuck to it. And one of them is not to have any ice in drinks and things, because I believed it harbored germs and things, particularly when you're in a bar or outside a restaurant, something like that, not to have ice. So I've always had to pipe up and say, no ice, please, So is that something that's actually a valid...
I'd say it's good for the environment, because they don't have to use as much energy to cool your drink. There is no valid... it used to be that, for example, in countries like Turkey, you had a high chance of getting salmonella infection,
right.
but not only through ice, but only through drinking water, anyhow. So at least that I know, there's no reason to avoid ice. But since you've been on it, and if you've been on the Shepherd trial, and you've been on it for a couple of years, you should just go on with it,
Yeah, I've stuck with it. The only other thing that diet, I was always told to, I vaguely recall, avoid, do you understand grapefruit juice?
Yeah. Grapefruit juice is something that should be avoided if you take cyclosporin.
Oh, right. Okay.
Okay, because it interacts with the cyclosporin. Grapefruit juice is one of those juices that patients need to be careful with once they take oral drugs, because of a lot of oral drugs, they are the liver, who deals with the drug, is somehow irritated by the grapefruit juice, and this is why grapefruit juice should be left out. And this is the only reason. It's not that it is dangerous.
Yeah, not only the juice though, also the fruit itself.
Of course, because
just to say it's the enzymes in this fruit.
Yeah.
Okay,
because there's juice in the fruit.
Yes, that's interesting, because I was on cyclosporin for a while.
Yeah,
I assume that's probably goes back many years now. That's probably where that element of advice came from. But
so if you're off the cyclosporin now, you can go ahead and have a grapefruit juice with ice.
Okay. Thank you.
You're more than welcome.
Can I also just say, that I find it very interesting, your quality of life and things. And I think the key thing that comes out with me is that it's just balancing things. I played golf yesterday. So today I've taken it easy. I've just done an hour's gardening, but I know in the traffic light system seems to ring true with me. I know that if you're just beginning to get to the sort of the yellow, it's time to hold back, and my limit for sort of rigorous exercise is roughly around, about an hour. Then I know that I'm doing that. But I have in the past hit the red running through a train to catch the last train. And I suddenly became an Olympic athlete and was doing 100 meters in some godforsaken time. I actually got on the train, and it taught me a lesson very quickly that never to do that again. And my heart was pounding like a cartoon character. And, so I learned the lesson, but what I picked out of it was that, you need to regulate what you do. And also, just breathing. I sat there and I breathed in and out slowly, and I recovered quite quickly. But it taught me a lesson, and it's held me in good stead over the years, just to regulate. You get to know, like you've said, you get to know, the patient gets to know his own body, doesn't he? And he knows what is possible and what's not possible. And
absolutely. And that's what I'm saying. You become an expert of your own disease. And that doesn't necessarily, mean that you're also an expert of my disease if I would have the same disease, because my body might react differently. And that's what I'm saying. So it's an individual patient's journey, and we should always be aware of the fact that it is the individual in front of you, the, how do you call it, the patient, the general patient, or so you're an individual, and this should be appreciated, and the treatment should be individually tailored, especially for you.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I always remember the first when I went to a GP, and it was eventually diagnosed, and she said that you will be the expert because it's so rare. And since that day, and it's coming useful over the years, I've kept a record of every appointment, everything that's been said, and I've got two books now full of it. So
I can absolutely imagine.
I could become an author, and but it became very useful, and it was so useful so that when you ended up unfortunately in hospital or anything, you could give people some advice of what you've received, what treatment you've had, how many blood transfusions, what's happened, etc. So you had to be, because the early days, people didn't generally know too much about it. You would end up in the hospital, and unfortunately you were the expert, you know, and it's until, you know, as time's gone by, and obviously more people with PNH and aplastic anemia, there's more information available, and which Marie and other people disseminate. So it's good that we have this.
Absolutely.
But
absolutely.
thank you. I found it very interesting.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
I've uploaded the English version of the QLQ AA PNH 54 so people can have a look at the questions. So hopefully that's, people can see it in the chat, just if just to have a look and use if they want to. But are there any more other questions? Pascale, what were you going to say? Sorry.
I was just going to ask if anybody would like me to upload the German version.
Could I ask something?
Go on.
Yeah, yes. Hi, my name's Stuart.
Hi,
and
Stuart.
I've got PNH and AA since 2017. My PNH is very low. I was on warfarin for a bit, but they said I've only got 4% clone of red and 30% white blood cells. So they took me off the warfarin, and I'm just on cyclosporin and a trompopag for my aplastic anemia. Yeah, quality of life. I'm lucky. I can cycle every day. I've broken my legs a few times on cycles and motorcycles. So I've got problems with my legs and my joints, and I'm never sure could that be PNH, or is it just partly because I've broken them a few times. At the moment, I've got a problem with my right foot. I can't seem to walk properly, and that just appeared out of nowhere. So I was surprised. I'm trying to reduce the amount of L-trompopag and cyclosporin at the moment, but I got to a level where everything started going down again. My hemoglobin and my platelets were going down, so they've sort of put me back up. But we're looking at reducing it. One of the things I was told early on was to stop drinking, and I like to have a drink now and then, so I did. They said it was a sensible thing, but over the years I think, well, a glass of wine or beer won't hurt me. And is there any sort of reasoning to just carry on like that? And it's quite safe to do that, I suppose.
So no medical advice, but here we are again at quality of life aspects. Okay, if you like to have a drink once in a while, go ahead and do it, you know, because the quality of life, you know, will go down if you don't do it, you know, significantly, you know. And what, you know, what is it if you gain 1 year, you know, being naughty and you know, irritated all the time, compared, you know, to a year lost, maybe, you know, being happy all the time. So not while driving your motorcycle, but if you like to enjoy a drink once in a while. The L-trombopag sometimes can affect the liver. And so, but
yeah, they do regular tests on my liver.
So if they do regular tests for your liver and you have a Guinness or whatever, fine, you know, once in a while, yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm
not the one.
I'm very lucky. They've got fantastic consultants there, and basically saved my life. So I've got a lot to be. I mean, just as an add-on, I had prostate cancer and an operation in 21, and in a way, and I don't know if other people reckon, when you get this initial MDS, you think you're kaput in a year. So you prepare for death, you do your wills and all that, yeah. And then fortunately I met Professor Mufti, who said, no, you're not going to die in a year, you've got plenty of time left. And he's such a confident guy. I said, well, great, I've got a few years. Then I got the prostate cancer. Oh shit, here comes another one. But what it did, it prepared me to not be shocked. So when the prostate cancer, I said, oh, bring it on. Let's see how I get on with that. You know, I didn't have that sort of internal bereavement process that I think a lot of people must go through when you're given an initial one where you don't have long to live. And it's like, I met a guy in hospital who had 5 diagnoses. He kept recovering from cancer. 15 years he's been going, you know. So when I had my transfusions 3 times a week, there was always people give me hope it will, you know, improve. So I feel I'm very lucky, and fatigue isn't an issue. I know what fatigue is like. I was going all the colours under the rainbow. I was jaundiced. They joke about me looking like the security guard at work. All these colours, and you know, so I know what. But so then you go through that, and then you realise what you can do. I try swim, have a cold shower every day. That seems to work miracles for me. It really gives me a boost, and that. And then the afternoon, I do start to feel it a bit. But I think you do learn about your body and what's best for it, and just try and keep to that, don't you? I think.
Absolutely, I absolutely agree. So another expert of his own disease. Yeah.
Well, thanks very much.
Diseases.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're more than welcome.
Okay. Bye.
Although, can I just say that brings up a topic. Thanks for sharing that, Stuart. You mentioned about joint pain. So that is something that patients do actually complain of quite often. And correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Panse, but we haven't linked that to PNH necessarily, have we? But from a patient point of view, I think that a lot of us would say that there's definitely a connection. We're not sure whether it's medication related or disease related. Am I right?
You are, especially with the patients under ravulizumab. I have a lot of patients that say the joint pain starts like about 6 or 7 weeks, so 2 weeks short of the next ravulizumab infusion. And so this is something that hasn't been looked into. Absolutely, something we should definitely make sure that is captured within the registry.
And another one that goes on that list from the patient's point of view, but the doctors aren't sure, is definitely cognitive functioning, things like memory loss, brain fog, concentration. You know, from a patient perspective, we don't think that that's really, we're only at the beginning of the journey of figuring out what that's all about, because I think we all just think, oh, I'm getting older, that's why I can't remember anything. And then you're in a room of PNH patients and everyone's like, oh, I thought it was just me getting older. I do Sudoku every day to try and make my brain work better. And then you realize that this is not just you. So that's something that we're really keen that future research is going to look into, because up to now, we're like, don't know, sorry, don't think it has been an issue, but, you know, we don't really know.
Absolutely agree. The tough thing with these issues, brain fog or whatever you want to call it, is that they are so hard to measure. So what is the ideal tool to measure brain fog? And then it waxes and wanes, you know, on Wednesday, you know, it's gone, on Thursday, it's back again. And so, but fatigue, and we were talking about fatigue, is not just physical exhaustion, it's also, psychological exhaustion, and, these things you're talking about, brain fog and all these kind of things. And it doesn't only affect people with PNH, somehow it also affects people with ITP. And those patients, for example, don't have no low hemoglobin levels. But if you ask those patients, in the beginning, when they start talking about the disease, they're all worried about thrombocytes. And then in the end, what, stays on is fatigue. And what we think about is, in my personal view, is we're always talking about a chronic disease, and a chronic disease affects you in a completely different way than an acute disease, where you have, I don't know, broken your leg and then you need an operation, and then once it's done, it's gone. So yeah, these are all issues we have to look into. The hard thing with all these issues is, how do we measure them? How do we come up with reliable patient numbers? Because, at a center, there might be 50 or 100 PNH patients, but is this enough? They're all on different treatments. And then, how can we get the money to study these things? Because you would have to put a patient, for example, in an MRI, in my opinion, or a functional MRI would even be better to measure brain function. And these things are expensive. And if there's no company paying for it, it's very, very hard to get funding for these kinds of study. So if this is something that is important to the patients, this is something, we should, for example, talk about at ePAG, if this is something that has to be, focused on in some way, because there are other physicians psychologists, neurologists, you know, who are expert in this kind of the disease, but they have no clue at all about PNH. And so we have to bring them together. So far, it was just the hematologists. Absolutely agree. Andy wants to say something.
Yeah. Yes. In terms of studies, what's we've mainly been talking about is ones where you compare people on treatment with people not on treatment, people with the illness, not with the illness, and so on. The other way of going about it, which can be very useful, is that they call it a longitudinal study. They say, here's this individual. What did you used to be able to do? What can you do now? And it makes a virtue out of the unpredictability of it. This is what we're actually looking at, because you can then compare that with Mr. Joe Bloggs, who's just broken his leg, or whatever, who's not got this, and you don't have to find something which is generic for everybody. So a longitudinal study, I would have thought that would be possible to develop under a different mechanism of study, really.
I think this is what the ePAG registry basically is for, a longitudinal study of hopefully each and every single patient with aplastic anemia and PNH, because since these diseases are so rare, I think every patient that is lost, you know, the documentation of the patient's journey that is lost is information that is lost, you know, we might gain something from. You're absolutely right, you know, those patients like Stephen, who said, I've been on the first eculizumab trial, you know, if we would, you know, cover your story about over the last 20 years, you know, and we have 500 of those patients, we would have much more information and material, you know, about the natural history of the disease. I absolutely agree. Yeah.
But then the questions which are required for that and how that's documented, how do you bring measurable things out of a narrative? That's something you're not just got straight questions, you're actually pulling things out of something which is free flow, rather than imposing a grid of things for people to fill in.
Absolutely. So we've been talking about, you know, what should be measured within the ePAG registry on and off, and Maria and Pascale know about, you know, all these items we're going to look into. But I absolutely agree, you should also somehow gather the information that is just, you know, somehow given by the patient, not in a structured way. But it's very tough to do it, and it takes a lot of money and a lot of personnel and a lot of patience, and a lot of study personnel in order to do that. Yeah, but I couldn't agree more. Yeah, nowadays that patients have their Apple Watch, you know, and Amazon knows, you know, every single heartbeat of your so we might end up, you know, that in 10 years, you know, we can extract those data from Amazon or Google, or I have no idea. Yeah.
Thanks. Anyone else have any more questions before we need to wrap up in about 5 minutes? You have a very forthcoming expert in your midst, who I'm sure will try and answer any question that you might have within reason. I've got one while other people are thinking. A principal investigator of a clinical trial, do they have much ability to influence which quality of life questionnaires are included?
No, principal investigator is not who has a principal investigator is just at this point in time, the trial's already been out there. If you're a principal investigator, it's the so-called scientific advisory board, you know, that basically does the concept for the trial. So if a company wants to do a trial, they ask a couple of people, you know, let's say 5 physicians who are very experienced in PNH, and then we're going to write up a protocol, and then they ask, is this protocol okay? And then they ask maybe a quality of life guy who's very experienced, which quality of life questionnaires should we use? And then he says, use the FACIT fatigue and use the ERTC QLQ C30 because those are validated questionnaires. pharmaceutical companies are always afraid that the questionnaires might wear those patients out and, refrain them from taking part in the study. What I try them all the time is, if you use the right questionnaire, it doesn't matter for a patient, because if you're in a trial, you have so many, hours and hours and hours, you have to wait for blood draws or results or urine samples, or anyway, while you're sitting there, you can just fill out a questionnaire. So yeah, it's not the principal investigators, it's the scientific advisory boards.
But the people on those can also potentially be the same people who are principal investigators.
Absolutely, most likely they are. But yeah.
They could also sort of, I guess, be lobbied from the patient advocacy point of view to ensure that that's being thought about and considered at that stage, because we don't get invited at that stage, because if we did, we would be definitely saying that this is needed.
You will be. Mark my words, you will be.
How much longer do we have to wait?
I have no idea. I mean, challenge those guys, these guys. And then, there's another thing. This is all recorded, so I have to be careful. So a pharmaceutical company's idea behind a new product is not, purely helping a patient. It's a company, so they want to make money. Okay, so this is the sole purpose. It's the same if you're selling a car. Mercedes is not there, because it drives so well. They want to make money. And so if you look where the pharmaceutical companies are, based, most of those are, for example, American or larger companies with American based. So the US American, physicians have a lot to say in whatever, is going to be happening. This is changing a bit, because I think Europe has quite some expertise in PNH and aplastic anemia. It's not just the US. We used to be looking at the US all the time. And so, yeah, I can only always advise you, make yourself heard whenever you, encounter a pharmaceutical rep or a person, just ask them directly, what trial did you do using those questionnaires? This is not what I want you to do, for the rest of the time. And meetings like the ePAG meeting or other conferences are a perfect way, to approach physicians and pharmaceutical reps, just to, to ask them. Because it's not a lot of money that needs to be, come up with in order to use an additional questionnaire. It's a couple of 10,000s or 100,000s, which is nothing compared to, the money you need to in order to, set up a trial, which is a couple of millions.
And you mentioned earlier that patients have to be included now. Do you know what kind of
law or regulation
regulation that is?
No, I can't remember, but it is a prerequisite, as far as I know, at least for oncology studies, to have a patient representative, be included into this scientific advisory board.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so I think we're pretty much there. So I'll thank you, Dr. Panse, and everybody for your contributions and for sharing this discussion. And I'll hand over to Mariangela to close the webinar.
So it has been really nice to hear all of you. Thank you so much for your contribution, for sharing your time and expertise also. So thank you very much, and see you for the next webinar. As always, you have all the information on our website. So hope to see you in 3 weeks, indeed. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.